Amen. Good morning, Image family. Hope you're doing well. Listen, if you're a guest with us, we are so glad that you're here. And man, I was just thinking about it. My clothes are wet, and I just love preaching like this because it's just a reminder of what God's doing and just never gets old, baptizing folks here at our gathering. Just super encouraged by what God is doing in and among so many of you. If you got your Bibles, 1 Corinthians Chapter 9 is where we're going to be. We've been walking through a series in the book of 1 Corinthians. And what we've done is we broke it into 5 mini-series because it's kind of a long book. We love walking through books of the Bible here. And so we broke it into 5 mini-series. And Pastor Fred, who was just up here with us, he kicked off the 3rd mini-series last week. And it's called Finding Freedom in a World of Demands. And if you're new with us, I just want to bring you up to speed on kind of what's going on. You've got the Apostle Paul who's writing this letter to the church that he actually started. And the irony is that the church he started and founded on the gospel has now drifted from the gospel. And so the main thing is no longer the main thing in the lives of the people that are in the church in Corinth. And so Paul had gotten word about this, and he begins to write them. And he says, listen, I want to hold up the gaps and issues that are going on in the church, and then I want to breathe the gospel on those things. And they're also confused. There's some confusion. They've been going back and forth with Paul. They're confused on culturally how to interact. And there was just a lot happening in Corinth. In fact, you could say that the church in Corinth was starting to look more like Corinth than Christ. And the hard part about Corinth is, man, it was a sex-crazed, idolatrous city that, man, people were running rampant in. And so it's infiltrating in the church, and there's all kinds of confusion at hand, and the church is in this chaotic state. And so Paul is saying, listen, I want to fix your eyes on the gospel, and I want to show you the implications of the gospel on your life and how it should impact how you live and how you view some of these challenges that you're in the midst of. And so Paul's going to continue in that this morning here in chapter 9. But for those of you that are here, you know I've got 3 kids. I've got Adeline, Braxton, and Cole. And my youngest, who's 4, his name's Cole, and he's super competitive. Like, my guy is super competitive. And so we're very competitive in our house anyway. And so we do a lot of competing as it relates to me and my son. And here's the deal. I have the rights and the freedom to beat my son every single time, okay? As his father, I have the ability to be able to beat him every single time. We'll go out to the baseball field, and he'll hit, I'll throw, and he'll hit, and then he'll try to outrun me getting the ball and tagging him at first. And my dude hates to lose. Like, he hates to lose. And so, like, I'll beat him by 5 steps. And he's like, Daddy, you didn't tag me. I'm like, no, I did tag you. And he's like, no, you didn't. And I was like, no, here's the deal. You lost. I won. He's like, no, I won. You lost. I'm like, no, you lost. And I'm like, just so you know, parents, discipleship moment. Kids got to know how to lose. You know what I'm saying? So it's important for me to teach him this is how you lose, okay? Losing is an important factor of life because then everybody get a trophy, okay? That's not how life works. In fact, I'm coaching my daughter's soccer team right now. I'm the head coach. You're the head coach of the soccer team. And I just want you to know, they don't keep score, but I do. And so at the end of the game, I bring them in. And I'm like, listen, we lost 6-4. Thing is, we scored more goals last week or this week than we did last week, right? I'm teaching them because that's how life is, okay? The same is true with my son. I make sure he knows that he's not always going to win. He's going to lose. But there are times when I do allow him to win. Why? Because I want to build up his confidence. I want to build up his self-esteem. I want him to understand what it means to win, too. How do you be a good winner? And man, how do you excel in life and your confidence? And so, though I have the rights and the freedom to beat him every single time, because I try to be a good father, I lay those rights and freedoms down in order for his well-being. Y'all, listen, if that's true for a jacked up dude like me, how much more true should that be for us when it comes to our faith? Christians, listen to me. How often are we willing to lay down certain rights and freedoms in order to see the advancement of the gospel in everyday life? This is where Paul's going to point us in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to pick up in verse 1. Follow along with me as I read. Paul says, am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If I am not an apostle to others, at least I am to you, because you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. Now, here's the thing we got to understand. Pause for just a minute, get the context. So Paul's just coming off chapter 8. Well, in chapter 8, he addresses the question that they had to him on, hey, Paul, listen, can we eat food that's been sacrificed to idols that's now sold in the market? I told you the church was confused about stuff. So Paul addresses that, and he says, yes, you have the freedom to eat that food because idols are nothing. Don't worry about it. At the same time, he issues a challenge saying that, listen, though you have the freedom, you're charged to navigate that freedom making sure that you're loving others in the way that you leverage it. In fact, Paul kind of says it like this. He says, let love be the lens by which you navigate your Christian freedom. Let love be your lens on how you navigate that freedom. In other words, he's saying, look, some of y'all might have the knowledge that idols are nothing, and you can go to the market and be like, well, sacrifice your idol, who cares? I know the one true God. But there are others in the church that don't have that kind of insight. They don't have that kind of knowledge. They're either spiritually weak or spiritually immature. And Paul's saying, you better not take that freedom and right that you have in the marketplace and do it in such a way that causes a brother and sister to stumble. There's weaker people around you, and love needs to be the guide. The goal is to love your brothers and sisters well. It's not to flaunt your freedoms in a way that causes them to stumble. Well, now in chapter 9, Paul does something brilliant. He's going to continue his challenge to the church. He's going to continue to challenge them as it relates to rights and freedom, but he's going to do it in a way that also validates his apostleship. Now, here's why this is important. If you're in the context of 1 Corinthians, which matters, the Corinthian church doesn't really like Paul. They've kind of dismissed him. They're like, this dude, I don't know, he's kind of off his rocker. Though he was the one that founded them, they had rejected him. And so Paul winsomely uses a teachable moment with his own life story to drive home his challenge and his point. So he does this in a brilliant way that I love. And so Paul kind of transitions in chapter 9. He's like, on the topic of freedoms and rights, I know a thing or two about freedom and rights. I have my own freedom and rights. He's like, I'm not only free, I'm also an apostle. I've seen Jesus, by the way. I work for Jesus. In fact, you're my work. You want to talk about rights? Let's get into rights. In essence, he's like, check my footwork. You ain't got these. He says, look at what I can do. Look what I have. Look at what I've been blessed to be able to do. And he's like, if you doubt me, watch this. And then in verse 3, he says this. My defense to those who examine me is this. Here's his defense for the people that are calling him out. He says, don't we have the right to eat and drink? Don't we have the right to be accompanied by a believing wife like the other apostles, the Lord's brothers and Cephas? Or do only Barnabas and I have no right to refrain from working? Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat its fruit? Or who shepherds a flock and does not drink the milk from the flock? Am I saying this from a human perspective? Does not the law also say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it treads grain. Pause real quick. Let me just interpret that for you for a second. It's pointing back to an Old Testament law. What would happen is they would take an ox, they would put it on a stick. The stick was connected to a stone. When the ox would walk, the stone would move. It would grind up the grain. They were told, don't muzzle the ox because the grain would fall off of that rock and the ox should be able to eat that grain as it works. So it should benefit from its own work. Paul's making an argument here. He says, is God really concerned about oxen? Isn't he really saying it for our sake? Yes, it is written for our sake. Because he who plows ought to plow in hope, and the one who threshes should thresh in the hope of sharing the crop. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it too much if we reap material benefits from you? If others have this right to receive benefits from you, don't we even more? So Paul says, you want to talk about rights and freedom? Let me just lay out some of mine. I have the right to be able to be compensated by you. Do you see what I have the ability to be able to do? I have the right to be able to receive compensation. Here's the ability that I have in my role. But then watch this. Look what he says in verse 12b. He says, nevertheless, we have not made use of this right. Instead, we endure everything so that we will not hinder the gospel of Christ. And then Paul interrupts himself. He kind of interrupts his line of thought. Remember, he's writing and a scribe is recording this. Paul's like, wait a minute, I got one more example to drive home my rights here. Here it is. You ready? Verse 13. Don't you know that those who perform the temple services eat the food from the temple, and those who serve the altar share in the offerings of the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should earn their living by the gospel. All right, Paul's done with his rights now, okay? But don't miss this. Here's what Paul does. He's making a point, but we can't miss this, that Paul gives a very clear appeal for compensating vocational pastors. By the way, let me just say this. I want you to understand that when you tithe and you give to the church, it's not just to fuel the ministry of the church, but it's also to fund the people that are ministering to you. This is the point that Paul's making. And he's saying, listen, it is a big deal. And this is a right, it's a privilege, it's an opportunity for vocational ministers to receive compensation. Another sermon for another day. But Paul says, though this is my God-given right, that he spent multiple verses laying out, which is to be compensated by you. He says, I have not chosen to make use of this right. And it's not easy, but I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to endure hardships. Why? Because he doesn't want to hinder the advancement of the gospel. He doesn't want to hinder the advancement of the gospel. Probably what's happening here, based on the context of what's happening in Corinth, is there has been other people, philosophers and teachers, that have been peddling religion and being paid for it. And so Paul says, hey, I'm going to opt out because I don't want anybody to misconstrue anything. And I want to be clear, and I want you to understand, and I want to distinguish my motives and my aim from everybody else. But regardless, what we see is that Paul is willing to do whatever it takes to reach other people with the gospel. He's willing to do whatever it takes. That means going without compensation. He's like, look, I have this God-given right. I'm laying it down. Why? Because I care more about the advancement of the gospel. Y'all, this is the point that Paul wants to drive home. This is the echo that we're going to see throughout the text, that Paul is willing to do whatever it takes to reach others with the gospel. He's going to drive this home even more in verse 15. He says, for my part, I have used none of these rights, nor have I written these things that they may be applied in my case. In other words, I'm not writing this to you so that you'll start compensating me. For it would be better for me to die than for anyone to deprive me of my boast. Now, what is Paul's boast? His boast is preaching the gospel without pay. That's what he's boasting about. Then he says in verse 16, for if I preach the gospel, I have no reason to boast because I'm compelled to preach. And woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward, but if unwillingly, I'm entrusted with a commission. What then is my reward? To preach the gospel and offer it free of charge, and not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. So Paul gets wordy here because he says, listen, I got this boast that I want you to know about, that I'm preaching the gospel free of charge. He's like, but here's the deal. Because I preach the gospel, I really have nothing to boast about in my own life. It's all about Jesus. But he says this captivating thing at the very end that I want to draw your attention to. He says, listen, in all of this, I want to hold up my reward. I'm willing to endure. I'm willing to go through the hardships. I'm willing to lay down my rights. Here's my reward. You ready? He says, to be able to lay down my rights in order to preach the gospel to you. What? Paul says my reward is taking my freedom and my rights, laying it down so the gospel advances to you. What a powerful statement from the Apostle Paul. Say, wait a minute, when is the last time we've thought about a reward being laying down our lives and our freedoms and our rights for the sake of the gospel? See, my question is, as we look at this, are we willing, like Paul, to do whatever it takes to reach people with the gospel? Paul's willing to lay down certain rights and certain privileges. Are we willing to do the same? Are we willing to do the same? Here's the thing. So often what happens is when it comes to freedoms that we've been given, when it comes to rights that we have, we spend more time and more intentionality on leveraging those rights and those freedoms for our own self-interest rather than laying them down to leverage them for the sake of the advancement of the gospel. And what we see from Paul is a challenge to reorient our perspective. What would it look like for us to lay down our rights and our freedoms for the sake of the gospel? What does that even look like? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, practically speaking, what does that look like? I want to walk through kind of 7 rights or freedoms that you might have that you could lay down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel, and talk about how this pertains to your life. Let's look at them. Number 1, cultural preferences. You have the freedom and the right to like what you want. You have the freedom and right to come from the culture that you've come from and to gravitate toward those things. You have the right and the freedom to pick and choose the things that you really aspire to be in life, and the things that this is the thing, right? I love this, I love that, I don't love that. You have those freedoms, preferences. My question is, are you willing to lay those preferences down, though, for the sake of the gospel? When it comes to interacting outside of the church, are you willing to take preferences and lay them down? You want to take preferences and lay them down? What about in here? Maybe there's preferences that you'd like to see in a church, or you'd like to see in a certain way, but it's like, you know what? I want to lay those down because what I know is the gospel's preached here week after week after week, and dead people are coming to life, and I want to see more of that, and so I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Are you willing to lay down your preferences for the sake of the gospel? Missionaries do this overseas all the time. There's American preferences that they have. They go into a different context and they're like, well, I got to lay this down for the sake of the gospel. Are you willing to do the same in your workplace, in your neighborhood, will you lay your preferences down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? What about food and drink? Let's talk about food and drink. You've got certain freedoms to eat what you want to eat and drink what you want to drink. Are you willing to lay those down for the sake of the gospel? As a Christian, there is a freedom to be able to drink alcohol in moderation, right? There's a freedom there to be able to do that. My question is, are you willing to lay that down for the sake of the gospel? Maybe for some of you, it's in your own life, you've got to lay that down. The Bible's very clear on how we go about that in moderation and making sure we're sober-minded and all of those kind of things. There's a freedom to do that. My question is, though, are you so in love with that freedom that you can't lay it down for the sake of the gospel? Maybe there's certain contexts where you shouldn't drink it all in, right? Because you want to see the advancement of the gospel happen in certain spaces or in certain ways. Are you sensitive and aware toward that freedom that you have and asking the question, how and when should I lay those things down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? There's many ways that could look. That might even be that you're DD for lost friends, right? And you take that moment and be like, you know what, I'm going to lay down this right. I could have a sip or two. I could have a drink or whatever. I'm going to lay that down for the sake of driving other people to love them well because I want to bridge the gap toward a relationship to share the gospel with them. Well, what about food, right? Are you willing to lay that down for the sake of the gospel? You have the freedom to eat what you want to eat, but are you willing to lay some of that down for the sake of God? I'll give you an example. I've been overseas, but I was in New York City, and we were in a Muslim context. It was 100,000 Muslims in one area. There's a whole strip where it's literally like being in, they called it Little Pakistan because it was like being there. And so, we were there and on a mission team, we were prayer walking, sharing the gospel, and like my ambition was I got to get in I want to be in a house, having a meal, and, so we could share the gospel. That was like a goal of mine. Me and my buddy, my best friend was with me there. And we enter into the town and I start kind of eating the foods you're eating. And I was like, whoa, this is not my cup of tea. I'm not crazy about this kind of stuff. The food was totally, I didn't like it. Okay. So we end up in this dude's house. So mission accomplished. And we're sitting there and he's like, I want to cook you dinner. I'm like, this is awesome. Okay. Well, he starts cooking dinner. It's terrible. Okay. And what I didn't know, like I'm gutting it down and my buddy, and we're just gutting it, right? So we clean our plates. He goes and gets more, brings it out there, lays it down. We're gutting it out. And I'm like, man, my buddy loves this food. And he's like elbowing me, like, knock it off. When he'd go up and get more, he'd come down and set it down. What I didn't realize is that in that culture, if you clean your plate, it means that you want more. So we cleaned our plate 4 or 5 times. And we can throw down, you know what I'm saying? But I want to throw down on food that I like to eat, not for food that I'm making myself eat. So we're standing there. I'm about to gag at this point. And I literally look at the guy and I'm like, listen, I cannot eat anymore. Like it was so good. Okay. But I cannot eat anymore. He's like, oh, well, then just leave the food there. In our culture, when you stop eating, it means that you're done. I was like, why didn't you tell me that from the jump, bro? Like, come on, man. And then he serves us up Sunny D, which was a delicacy for him. So we had that on the back end. Well, we end up leaving the place, shared the gospel with him. Powerful moment, right? My buddy throws up in the bushes on the way out. It was terrible. It's a story we'll remember forever. But he was willing to lay it down for the sake of the gospel. And the whole time in there, we're like, FTG, baby, for the gospel. Like, we got this. Like, under the table, like, we can do this. So I say that to say, what are other instances in your life? Maybe it's food, maybe it's not. Maybe it's drink, maybe it's not. But what are the freedoms and the rights that you have that you're willing to lay down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? Here's a big one. What about your political expression? Listen, you got the right to be a Republican. You got the right to be a Democrat. You got the right to be a Green Party. You can go create your own party. You can write yourself in the back. You got the freedom. It's there. You have the God-given, American-born, American citizen right to be able to vote and to be able to claim your party. That's awesome. Let me ask you this, though. Are you willing to lay that down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? Are you willing to kind of tone it down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? Maybe say it like this. Are you more concerned about convincing people to join your party than you are about sharing Jesus with them? Are we willing to lay down our perspective and preferences when it comes to our politics in order to reach people with the gospel? Do people know you based off your political preference, or do they know you as a follower of Jesus? Right? Like when we get in the weeds, like, are we willing to lay that down, or is it becoming a barrier for other people to not hear and experience Jesus? Would you go up to a coworker and be like, hey, I want to talk to you about Jesus? And like, nah, bro, you're just crazy left wing or crazy right wing. Like, I don't want anything to do with you. If that's the case, you're not laying it down. Are you willing to lay down your political preference, your political expression, in order to advance the gospel? For some of you, you need to tone it down on social media. Maybe that's where you need to do it, right? You're quiet at work, but loud on social media. Listen, your coworkers see that stuff. okay? Like, I know you may not think they don't, but they do. They see it. What does it look like to tone back some of that stuff? And again, I'm not saying you can't advocate. I'm not saying you can't speak out for. I'm just saying, is it the main thing in your life? And are there times when you're not willing to lay that down? At the end of the day, listen, when you're having a conversation about eternity, politics don't matter. And if they're getting in the way of that conversation, that's a problem. Are we willing to lay down our political expression in order for the advancement of the gospel? What about this? Our use of time and comfort. You know what? You got the right and the freedom to use your time the way you want to use it and to create comforts in the way that you want to create them. But my question is, are you willing to lay that down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? That might mean taking a step to serve here on the weekend. And I know that takes some of your time. It might mean having somebody over for dinner. It might mean that you're engaging with somebody at your workplace. It might mean that you step out of your comfort zone and invite that coworker that's kind of on the outside of the cool crowd to lunch. Are you willing to leverage your time for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? Listen, when you're at work, you get in the grind, you get in work mode. Are you so consumed with the time clock and how things are moving that you're missing, man, sometimes I got to hit pause on a moment so I can be intentional spiritually with this person. Maybe you need to stop and pray with them. Maybe you need to meet them where they are when it comes to your time. What about comfort? Let's talk about that. For some of you, I get it. It's uncomfortable to share the gospel. It's uncomfortable to engage in gospel conversations. Well, you know what? You can still invite them to church. Invite them to experience the body of Christ. And I know you're like, bro, I don't got the gift of evangelism. Cool, no problem. Invite them to the place where others do have that gift. And let's lean in together. It's one big family to reflect the body of Christ to the world. Each one of us has a different gift. Invite people in. And I know for some of you are coming up to Easter, and it's like, man, I just don't know. Part of being willing to lay down your comforts for the sake of the gospel might mean you stepping out of your comfort zone to have a spiritual conversation or simply invite somebody to attend the church gathering. Are we willing to lay down our time and our comfort? And yes, it's inconvenient. And yes, it can be challenging. But the question is how much is the gospel worth it? What about our social standing or reputation? Are you willing to lay that down for the sake of the gospel? Listen, all of you, in some regard, have some kind of hierarchy in your job or in your place in society. Everybody has a label. Are you willing to lay that label down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? Practically speaking, let me talk to those of you that are higher up on the ladder. Do you understand some of the most profound impact you can have is by being intentional with those who are the lowest on the ladder? To lay down your title and not act like the rest of corporate America that's lost and treat people as less than, but to actually treat them as more? What would it look like to lay down your status and your title for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? Maybe it's that you go to the people that are the farthest away from you on the hierarchy to be able to engage with them and be intentional to share them the gospel. Maybe it's your standing, or maybe it's just your focus. Maybe you're so concerned about climbing the corporate ladder that it is actually more important than advancing the gospel. I think for many of us, what happens is we get caught up in the corporate grind, and our aim, our fixation is what's next as opposed to what's now, and being faithful to where God's called you, and that is that you are an ambassador. You're a representative of Christ. He's making his appeal through you. And that means laying down our ambition oftentimes for our status and our career in order to make much of the name of Jesus. This is what Paul's doing. He's like, do you see who I am? Do you see all that I've been given? But I'm willing to lay it all down. Why? For the advancement of the gospel. Is the same true for you in your workplace or at home? Whatever your status is, whatever your standing is, are you willing to lay that down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? How could you be intentional to leverage some of your platforms for the sake of the gospel? How could you be intentional to make sure that you're not finding your identity in your standing or reputation? Because if your identity is fixated on that kind of stuff, you're not caring about the advancement of the gospel. You're caring about building up your own kingdom. Guys, remember, Jesus' call is don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store them up in heaven where nothing can destroy them. See, what happens so often is we get distracted and we're not actually giving up freedoms. We're wallowing in them to create the best life now, the greatest dynasty we can in this moment, and we actually take the mission of God and push it over to the side. Are we willing to lay down our social standing and our reputation? What about language and terminology? What about language? Are you willing to lay this down? We talk a certain way. We interact in certain ways. For some of you, you grew up in the church. Awesome. You speak something called Christianese. Cool. You keep speaking that among your Christian friends. But are you willing to lay that down when it comes to your non-Christian friends? Listen, if you're out there with non-Christians jockeying like heady theology, it's just not helpful. That's not helpful. Are you willing to lay down your knowledge and parts of your theology in order to meet people where they are just to point them to Jesus? Like, can you do that? What about this one? I know for some Christians, they believe there's a Christian freedom for them to cuss. Cool, you do you, like you figure out that freedom. Maybe you have people around you that are Christians and you have the knowledge to be able to parse through that, and that's something that's in your own conviction that you've resolved. That's your own conscience to deal with, and you and the Lord. But here's the reality that we need to talk about. What about around the non-Christians? Right, like what does that look like? See, here's the thing. You may think you have the knowledge and the ability to be able to do this, and you might do this, but it becomes part of your lifestyle, and then you go out in the world and you do this, and all the non-Christians are looking at you like, bro, I'm confused. You look like everybody else. Are you willing to lay down a freedom that you've perceived, freedom or right that you feel like you have for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? What you say matters. What comes out of your mouth matters. James would say it's like a rudder on a ship. Here's the thing about a rudder. Really small, big impact. The same's true with your tongue. It's small, but it has a big impact, and the world is watching. Are we willing to lay down perceived rights and preferences for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? What about opinions? Listen, you have the right and the freedom to have any kind of opinions that you want. The saying goes, and I'll use a different body part, but opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got a couple and they stink, okay? Some of y'all know the actual one. I'm not going to use that up here, okay? You know why? I don't want to use my freedom in a way that hinders the gospel, okay? There we go. Perfect example. But we all have opinions, right? Are you willing to lay those opinions down for the sake of the gospel? There's certain things that you perceive, certain ideas that you have. Are you willing to kind of pump the brakes on those for the sake of the gospel going forward? For some of you, maybe this is on social media, that you need to tone down the noise on social media with some of your opinions because people are confused, or you're creating a distraction from the advancement of the gospel. Again, I'm not saying you can't speak out. I'm not saying you can't have an opinion. I'm just saying do it in a way that's sensitive to the people around you, especially the non-Christians who are looking in. A watching world is looking at us, trying to figure out how and why we do the things that we do. We don't want to make it hard for them. We want to make it easy for them to come to Christ. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to reach somebody with the gospel? That was Paul's aim. Is it yours? Listen, you have the right to fill up your schedule to the max. You have the right to pencil in something for every hour of every day. You have the right to slam that thing. But for some of you, maybe the challenge is you actually lay down the rights that you have and the freedoms that you have with your schedule in order to create margin to actually advance the gospel. We live in this culture that's just, everybody's busy. Everybody's always stacked. Everybody's like, I'm just so busy. It's like, all right, here, we all know everybody's busy, okay? We don't have to talk about it anymore. We all know we're busy. In fact, some people talk about how busy they are more than they talk about Jesus himself. It's a problem. Listen, you got the freedom to do what you want with your schedule. You get the right to do that in a lot of ways. But for some of you, the challenge this morning is laying down some of that in order to create more space and more margin to actually go all in for the gospel, to reach more people with Christ, to create more space, to have time with non-Christians, to read the Bible with somebody, to invite somebody to lunch, to have a Jesus conversation. If you find yourself at a place where you're too busy to talk about Jesus, that's a problem. That's a problem. Listen, you have the right to choose the job that you want. For some of you, you're in the process of processing a career. I know we got a lot of college students here. Listen, you have the right and the freedom to pick pretty much whatever job that you want to pick, even if you know that job is going to suck the life out of you and give you no margin and no ability. Are you willing to potentially say no to that right, to that job, in order to be more effective witness and minister of the gospel? Something to wrestle with. Again, do that with counsel and people around you, within community groups and other pastors. Process that. But man, we got a lot of rights. And the question is, are we willing to lay those rights and freedoms down for the sake of the advancement of the gospel? And I think if we're not careful, what happens is we get so busy and so consumed with our careers that, man, we just miss. In fact, I think for some of us, the reason why we're not more effective in reaching more people with the gospel is because we're lavishing ourselves on the rights and freedoms that we have rather than laying them down for the sake of the gospel. Y'all, listen, here's my challenge in this. And I know for some it's just like, boom, gosh, oh man, like, if you could walk out of here with just an awareness, right? An awareness that you have freedom, an awareness that you have rights, and an awareness for opportunities in which you can actually lay them down. What happens is, man, we live this compartmentalized Christianity to where it's like we're in here on Sundays, we're like, yeah. We go out on Mondays, and it's like we get in the corporate grind, and we just kind of forget everything. We're like, man, we're checked out, and it's like spiritual stuff, huh? What do you mean? Or we go to school, and we get to class, or by Tuesday, we've just kind of, everything's punted. And I think where our miss is we don't have this awareness and sensitivity as we walk throughout life, that our primary calling is not school, it's not our vocation, it's to be ambassadors of Jesus. And as ambassadors, 2 Corinthians 5, where Christ is literally making his appeal through us, it means that we've got to be intentional to evaluate in life ways that we can make Jesus' name known. And so if nothing else, I just want to challenge you to walk out of here and be processing how could you become more aware of opportunities to advance the gospel and potentially laying down certain rights and freedoms in order to do so. That's my hope, is if we could cultivate an awareness and push against compartmentalized Christianity, where we see that Jesus is not a thing in our life that we do on Sundays. He is the thing that our life revolves around. And when we begin to see that, it starts to change everything. And we do have this awareness of like, oh, wait a minute, I've got this moment. I think I could lay this right down and I can move on. All right, Paul's going to broaden the scope here of his point in verse 19. He says this, although I am free from all and not anyone's slave, I have made myself a slave to everyone in order to win more people. He's going to explain what that looks like in verse 20. Here it is. To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law. To those who are without the law, like one without the law, though I'm not without God's law, but under the law of Christ, to win those without the law. Verse 22, to the weak, I become weak in order to win the weak. I have become all things to all people so that I may, by every possible means, save some. Now I do all this because of the gospel, so that I may share in the blessings. Paul says, I become all things to all people. I love his caveats in there. He gets wordy. He's like, I'm this, but here, and I kind of do it this way. And he wants to be so clear on all this. Here's what I want you to see first before we move on in the application here. The first thing I want you to see is this, particularly for those of you that are here and you're not a Christian, is what I need you to understand is that the gospel is not just for religious people. It's not just for moral people, and it's not just for strong people. What we see here is that the gospel is for weak people, outside people, and those who feel like they're far from God. These are the people that Paul's saying, I become all things to. Why? Because he wants them to see the gospel. For some of you here, you fall into one of these camps that Paul's talking about. Maybe you grew up religious and you know about God. You know about what Jesus has done. You're familiar with those things, but you've never actually entered into a relationship with Jesus. You've never surrendered your life to Christ. For some of you, you're here and you're a rebel, man. You're running your own lane. You're doing your own thing. For others of you, you walked in here and you're weak. You're worn down by situations or circumstances. Maybe you're confused, or maybe you're curious. What I want you to see based on the way that Paul lives his life is that the gospel comes to you exactly as you are. Listen to me, you don't got to clean yourself up. You don't got to become a better person. You don't have to change anything about you. You just surrender all that you are to everything that Christ has done. The beauty of what we see in Paul's life is that he goes to these people exactly as they are. Yo, this is a mirror. He's just mirroring what Christ has done to him and what Christ has done for us, that he comes to you exactly as you are. All of your sin, all of your shame, all of it. He comes to you and meets you in that sin. And he says, my life, I've lived in your place. My death, I've died for you. The new life, you can have it all through faith in my finished work. Jesus extends to us an incredible gift. He says, I come to you as you are, but I'll never leave you the same. The gospel says you don't got to change anything about you. You just surrender all that you are. Paul's an example of that. He's just mirroring what Christ has done to us. And for some of you, you're here and you're far from God, and God's brought you here this morning for a very specific reason, so that you would hear that the gospel is a message of how God came to you exactly where you are to do everything necessary to save you. And some of you need to believe in that for the very first time this morning. You need to actually surrender to that, move from knowledge to surrender. So Paul's example here, he's pointing to being all things for all people. Pointing to, yes, the fact that the gospel is for all people, and the gospel comes to you exactly as you are, but he's also pointing to something greater. He's talking about meeting people where they are, meeting people where they are. Now, my dad, I love him. He's awesome. Super intentional guy, like very intentional. When he's with you, he's locked in, and he gets real locked in. He just, he like gets in the moment, and he actually he'll start to sort of mirror accents at times, like, because he's so locked in with the moment. And so, we got family from Alabama, and like, we get to Alabama, and you're like, was that a twang I heard? Like, I think it was. And, country Alabama is different than like country North Carolina and where they were from in like Appalachia. So like, you get there and you're kind of like, this is a little bit different kind of accent. You know what I'm saying? And so, he can kind of just really be there and present, and that starts to change. I'll never forget one time, I was about 12, we were at a guy's house. He's from Great Britain. And we're at the house, and all of a sudden I hear him go, hello, John. John, where does the picture go? And I'm like, what? Like, what did you just do? Like, we get in the car. I'm like, Dad, listen, we got to talk. Did you know you created a British accent at this dude's house? He's like, son, what are you talking about? I was like, Dad, like, I know, like, you did it. Like, we were all laughing in the car, and he's like, I didn't even know that I did it. You know what I'm saying? Like, he just kind of mirrored the moment and got caught up with old John, who's from Britain, and developed a British accent. I don't know. It's not exactly what Paul's talking about here, but it's close. But it's close, right? Paul's talking about, listen, how can we meet people where they are? What does that look like? Well, it's meeting people where they are with your story, but also your life experiences. It's your story, but also your life experiences. Let me give you an example. Let's talk through this. So when I'm talking to somebody that grew up religious, right, I'm going to flex my spiritual story in a certain way to meet them where they are. I'm not being dishonest. I'm highlighting certain points, right? Like, I'm going to talk about I grew up in the church, and I grew up in this sort of way, and I grew up in this type of home, and I'm really going to nail down, like, for the religious person, I'm going to meet them right there in the midst of that religion, right? I'm going to flex that part to meet them where they are. Now, if I'm talking to the rebel, the one that's running, right, I'm highlighting a different part of my story. I'm talking about clubbing Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like back in the day. You know what I'm saying? I'm highlighting different moments in my story, God's story He's given me, to be able to meet them where they are. So I'm using that story, and I'm flexing that spiritual story in a way to where I can convey the gospel to that person. I can meet them in understanding where they are. It's also how we flex our life experiences, right? Like, think about this. When you're talking to somebody that's going through something that's in a weak moment and they feel weak, what if maybe, dudes, you didn't try to fix their problem, but you just listened? Just met them where they are. There's a word for that, by the way. It's called empathy. But what if you just met them in that moment, and then you said, listen, man, I can somewhat connect with, I remember when I was weak and I had this moment and I lost this or this happened to me, right? And you meet them in the midst of that. What about in the corporate scene? Somebody comes to you and like, man, I'm really frustrated at work, and I'm just, man, I don't know how to navigate this. And all of a sudden you come back and you're like, man, I hear that. Let me tell you, I've been where you are in some regard, not exactly the same, but I've been where you are, and man, this is kind of, right, meeting them where you are. You have. God has given every one of you life experiences and situations that you've walked through. Do you know them, and can you leverage them in order to meet people where they are? This is what Paul's saying. Paul had life experiences. The dude was a Jew, right? He says, look, I went to the Jews and I met them where they are because I wanted to save them. I want them to hear about Jesus, right? He says, I go to the people that are weak. Paul's been weak before, right? He had ailments. He talked about it in 1 Corinthians. He's meeting them, and he can go where. Are you willing to do the same thing? Can you leverage your experiences and your situations in order to reach people with the gospel? Because watch this. Here's how it works. You're talking to a weak person. They're in the midst of struggle, circumstantial, whatever else. Yeah, I remember the time that I was weak too, and I walked through this situation. I walked through this circumstance, and what I found is in the midst of that, what's true is Psalm 34, that God's near to the brokenhearted. And I know that in those moments, I looked everywhere else, but the one place I could only find answers from, the one place I only had hope from was Jesus, right? You bridge that gap. You're talking to somebody at work. Man, I'm going through this thing at work, and it's just really hard, and work's been really challenging, and man, and you mean it, man, I've been in a similar situation. It was terrible. It was hard. But man, here's what I remembered in that moment, that my identity is not found in my job. My identity is found in Christ, and that identity I have in Christ is far greater than anything the job could ever offer me. And I realize that when I look to my job, it leaves me wanting more and never satisfied. But when I look to Jesus, he always satisfies. Right? You see what I'm doing? Like, it's just the bridge to the gospel. You use your circumstances and situations to bridge to the gospel. This is what Paul did. He said, I'm willing to meet people where they are. I'm ready to meet them where they are. I think the problem so often is we just compartmentalize too much, though. So we hear that, and here we go out there. Again, we just kind of Christianity over here, work life over here, and we're not paying attention. We're not aware. And so what happens is that we kind of get conflated in these moments where we're in our job and we're like not thinking about, oh, I could bridge to the gospel. So again, one of my hopes is just to challenge you to be aware that when you're out there, you have tons and tons of opportunities. Listen, if Jesus has said he's making his appeal through you, you better believe he's going to set you up to make that appeal through you. And so are we aware of those moments? Are we aware about that? Man, everything we do, everything we've been through, they're all tools and opportunities to bridge to the gospel. This is Paul. Everything that Paul has been pointing to here is being willing to do whatever it takes to reach people with the gospel. His awareness, his IQ, gospel IQ is like up here. He's like, man, my life revolves around the gospel. My question to you this morning is, are you willing to do whatever it takes to reach one more person for the gospel? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to reach one more person for the gospel? You probably never heard of a lady named Mary Clark. Mary Clark grew up in California, very, very wealthy area, came from a wealthy family, and God began to stir a burden in her life and in her heart for people that were in prison. And so she processed this, she prayed through this, and she thought through this, man, what do I do? And she was conflicted, and finally she says, enough, I'm going to move to Mexico. And she moves to Mexico, and she moves herself into a 10 by 10 kind of brick house. It's not a cell because she's not officially in the jail, but she's right next to it. And she lives her life with these criminals for a period of time, a long period of time. And so these inmates grew to know her and love her, and she got a nickname, and her nickname was the Prison Angel. They called her the Prison Angel. And listen, her impact and influence was so great. Watch this. There would be riots that break out with bullets flying and all kinds of things happening. And she would just walk in the room and everything would stop. Why? Because she had that kind of impact and that kind of influence. She was incredible. And everybody looked up to her and they respected her. See, Mary, she had to become like one of them in order to reach them. Y'all, history has been changed forever because of people like her who are willing to do whatever it takes to advance the gospel. We're here today because Paul was willing to do whatever it takes to advance the gospel. The question is, will that be true for us? And you go, but man, I don't know how. Y'all, listen, the reality is you will never, ever, ever be motivated to lay down any rights or any kind of freedoms in your life if your eyes are not fixed on Jesus. It's why we say every single week, and this week's no different, that the main application of this entire thing is to fix your eyes on Jesus. That's why we say the gospel is not just the start of the Christian life, it's the essence of the Christian life, because here's the reality. You will never be motivated out there to lay down any kind of freedoms or any kind of rights if your eyes aren't fixed on Jesus, and you're not seeing what he laid down for you. See, the beauty of the gospel when we fix our eyes on Jesus, we realize that Jesus didn't just lay down a few things or some things. He laid down everything for you and for me. When you were running from him and rejecting him, he gave everything for you to meet you where you are in the midst of your sin to offer you salvation. You want to talk about giving up rights? You want to talk about giving up freedom? Christ did it to the greatest extent. And when you see that and when your eyes are fixed on that, guess what happens? You begin to become the things that Christ has been to you. But you will never become the things that Christ has been to you if your eyes aren't fixed on what he's done for you and who he is. See, the gospel is both the means and the motivation for Paul and for you and for me that will never, ever be compelled to do any kind of action coming out of this if we don't see the greatest action that was done for us, if we don't see the greatest sacrifice and the greatest service that was done for us. Listen, I know it's hard to lay down freedom. I know it's hard to lay down rights. The only way that we're going to overcome that, the only way that we can step into that is by fixing our eyes on Jesus. The gospel is both the means and the motivation for how we do this well. It's the thing that allows us to see that life is all about Jesus. Listen, here's what happens. We live this compartmentalized life to come back to that, and this is what it looks like. I don't know if y'all like waffles. I love waffles. You should put butter on your waffles. It's extra protein and some good fat that you should get for you, okay? Nutrition facts. There you go. But put that on there, right? Here's what happens. I don't know about you, but I got to put the butter on there, and it only gets in a few of the squares. You feel me? It's frustrating, but I don't like it. And so, I get it on there. Now, that's different than the syrup that you should definitely put on your waffle, okay? The syrup, when you pour that over, every crevice, right? It's awesome. It's so good. It's the goodness of God in the butter, the syrup, and the waffle. It's there. But y'all, this is what our lives should look like. That Jesus is not just in part of our lives, but he's the syrup. He is in all of our lives, that he covers and is invading and invested in everything. But the only way that that will ever be true is if every single day we wake up and we fix our eyes on Jesus, realizing he's not a thing, but he's the thing. And when he's the thing, he defines everything. He's not the list. He's not number one on the list of things that are priorities in our life. He is the paper that we write the list on. And so if we don't get that, we'll have no means and no motivation for being witnesses out there and seeing the gospel advance out there. We'll have no desire to do that if we don't remember what we've been saved from and who we've been saved to. For others of you, the challenge is that your story's gotten old. Like you're kind of like, the gospel was cool when I was really bad and, some changes happened, but like now, God's kind of lucky to have me or I'm not that bad. Listen to me. The same grace that you needed the day that you believed is the same grace that you need today, and it's the same grace that you'll need tomorrow, the rest of your life. That story cannot get old. When that story gets old, you grow stale. The thing that motivates you to do whatever it takes is remembering that Jesus did whatever it took to save your dirty, rotten soul. When you were running from him and a rebel from him, he laid it all down for you. And the question is, will we respond the same way? Will we respond the same way? Listen, if you're here and you're not a Christian, my hope is that in this, you see the beauty of the fact that the gospel is all about a Savior who gave up everything for you. That Jesus set aside his heavenly glory to enter a world, to suffer, to die so that we would have life. That Romans 5:8 is true, that God demonstrated his love for us in this, that while you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. That listen, you walked in here and you got questions, you got sin, you've got shame that you see this morning as we hold up this kind of unique way of living that as Christians we believe God's called us into. And what I hope you see from this is you see through it to the Savior that it points to, who came to you and laid down everything in your place. Jesus gave up everything. He became a servant so that you might be saved. And he welcomes you exactly as you are. For some of you this morning, you need to receive that for the very first time. You need to look to Jesus and believe that he is meeting you right now in this moment. And maybe you've heard the gospel before, but for whatever reason, you really believe that when Jesus died on the cross, that somehow it counted for you. And all you know is that you want to surrender to this Jesus who meets you where you are, who offers you everything you could never achieve. All you have to do is surrender. Just believe in the finished work of Jesus. I mean, for others of you, the challenge is that we wouldn't get distracted, that we wouldn't get derailed in this life. For some of you, it's refocusing this morning that your aim and your mission is the gospel. And in just a moment, we're going to turn this into a prayer space like we do every week. For some of you, you need to come forward and you need to pray because you've been distracted, that the gospel has not been what your life's been about. You've been more about your job than you have Jesus. You've been more willing to submit to your boss than you have to Jesus. Right? And you've gotten distracted that the mission of your life, you're not willing to do whatever it takes because your eyes aren't fixed on Jesus. And the beauty of the gospel is that Jesus' call this morning is not to make you feel guilty and shameful. It's to make you feel loved and seen. And he says, I see you in the midst of your sin. I see you in the midst of not prioritizing me, but guess what? I died for that. I'm loving you through that. For some of you this morning, you need to get on your knees and you need to ask God, God, would you make my life all about the gospel? Would I be willing to do whatever it takes to reach one more for Jesus? For others of you, you need to pray for boldness or clarity to lay down certain rights or freedoms in your life. Maybe it's around Easter that there's somebody that you need to invite. There's somebody you need to ask to come and be present here. And you need to pray, God, give me boldness. Or maybe it's, God, show me what rights and freedom I need to lay down. I want my life to be all about you. I want the gospel to be my aim, and I want my life to be a missionary tool. Show me and shape me, oh Lord. So would you bow your heads with me? God, we come before you and we thank you that you did everything necessary to save us, that when we were dead in our trespasses and sins, you made us alive again, that you came to us where we are to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. God, I pray that we would begin to become the things that you've been to us, that we, like you, would lay down freedoms and rights for the sake of pointing people to you. God, stir our affections for what you've done for us. Remind us of our salvation so that we'd be motivated to lay down any rights or freedoms for the sake of one more coming to know you. Put a fire in our bones that would make our life about the gospel. God, we need you. Work in this place.